This is one of my favorite lessons from Scripture. It's a simple, small lesson, but it has so many different layers of different things going on at the same time. And it's got a repetitive, almost a drumbeat of comedy all the way through the lesson that we, in our American standard of serious religion, overlook almost entirely. It's supposed to be funny that Mary is the one who says to Jesus, "What do you mean you're not ready?" It's supposed to be funny that she turns to the stewards and says to them, "Do whatever he tells you." It's supposed to be funny that he is sort of outed by his mother before he's ready to do it. Jewish mother? Could be the beginning of that tradition for us. All of that to say, this is a lesson that requires our humor as well as our faith and our serious understanding if we're going to get the whole story. It's funny that the steward says, most people don't serve this stuff until everybody, the bad wine, until everybody's drunk. You're serving the best wine. Meaning, of course, that everybody must have been drunk at that point. It's an interesting story. And our well-based concern with the abuse of alcohol gets in the way of some of it. But what really gets in the way of most of this lesson is our need to be more serious about God than God is about God, and how we might temper that a little bit and bring our true humanity to this covenant of faith. From Isaiah, we hear in the voice of God, "You shall be called, my delight is in her. For the Lord delights in you as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride. So shall your God rejoice over you." That's not a lesson we take very seriously, is it? How many of us are worried too much about how delighted God is with us? We usually work on the other end of the spectrum, to our own peril, perhaps. For many years, this gospel was paired with the lesson that you've just heard, Psalm 96, this psalm, and it starts like this: "Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord and bless his name. Proclaim the good news of God's salvation from day to day." John the Evangelist tells us Jesus did this, the turning of the water into wine, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Who am I that the Lord should delight in me? Who are we that God should rejoice over us? Have you ever stopped to think how much time we spend in church confessing our sins, and how little time we spend rejoicing in who we are, in who we have been made by this God who creates the universe? Today's lesson seems to address joy for me, real joy, real thankfulness that we are God's and God is ours. In the Old Testament, through the mouth of Isaiah, we hear God speak his love and his love affair with Israel. He rejoices over her as a bridegroom rejoices over his bride. And in the psalm, we're encouraged to spread that good news, the gladness of God's salvation, spread it every day in our lives of joy. What's the problem, though? I have to say, in looking out over this congregation for all of these Sundays for the last year, today's my anniversary with you. So for a year now, we've been doing this together. And I have to tell you, you're pretty much like Christians in other places. For the last 40 years, I could easily imagine an 11th commandment, which might say something like, "Thou shalt not smile in church. Keep your faces long, and don't let on that you're having any fun." Somehow, We've confused reverence with piety and frowning, and I believe we suffer from it. Somewhere we've gotten the idea that the Christian thing to do is to be reserved and attentive and exceedingly serious. But let's remember that even dear Teresa of Avila, no shabby saint in her own right, and a doctor of the church, a mystic and reformer, once wrote, "May God protect me from gloomy saints." Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting that we redecorate the church as a casino with lots of noise and colored lights and blaring music. But we need to find some middle ground. You know, I think I've said some pretty funny things from this pulpit, and occasionally I get a glimmer from an eye and sometimes a stuffed giggle. But if you ever really laughed at one of my jokes, I might fall right down on the floor. It's all right to laugh in church. It may even be necessary to laugh in church, to share our joy with one another. I had a really good friend at Sewanee, where my seminary was. She was the wife of a professor. Her name was Barbara. And during my last year on the mountain, Barbara worked for months on a big project that she kept covered. She kept it quiet. She kept it out of everyone's sight. Barbara was a potter. And then as Christmas approached, she announced the date that she would unveil this new piece that we all knew she'd been working on for an entire year. Well, we all packed up and went out the 7 miles to her studio at St. Mary's Convent on the Brow, one of the most beautiful places that you can imagine. We quaffed some champagne, cheap, but champagne nonetheless, and made a gift to a feeding charity that she was sponsoring that Christmas. And after we'd had some time to say our hellos, without any introduction or fanfare, Barbara whipped back the veil that had been covering a lumpy tabletop and displayed her work of art. Turns out it was a whole collection. It was a nativity scene. It was a creche with a soft glaze and in a natural color of local clay, complete with sheep, oxen, shepherds, farmhands, the Holy Family, and 3 regal Eastern kings sitting atop sleepy-eyed camels that looked like they'd come a long, long way. I have to admit, I felt there in the room where we stood as if there was a moment of disappointment as we stood around that table. We'd heard so much about the project, and for months we'd looked forward to see what she had made, just what she had made. Just one more nativity scene? Just one more creche to sit out for 12 days to remind us of the miracle in Bethlehem stable? I mean, it was a gathering of seminarians and professors and a visiting bishop or two. It was a religious crowd. We were not put off by another representation of the incarnation of a creator God. No, the incarnation of a creator God. That's miracle enough. We weren't put off by that, but really, another one? But listen, it was just about then when a few people began to see the difference. The woman next to me said, "Oh, look at that." And at that very second, I noticed something peculiar myself. First, in the image of the mother, Mary, and then in the in the face of the head angel, and then in the wise men. They were all laughing. They were guffawing. They were leaned back and having one at whatever they saw. They were laughing. Every one of these traditional clay characters from Bethlehem were literally laughing themselves to tears, tears of joy over the baby shining there in the manger. One fat wise man was leaned way back in his saddle on top of a camel, holding his stomach with his feet flung in the air in front of him and pointing to the manger as tears of laughter rolled down his cheek. Even the sheep and the cattle were smiling. The angel giggles. The shepherds were slapping one another on the back as the baby in the manger gurgles or maybe giggles. Perhaps the first time humanity hears divine laughter. This clearly wasn't just one more nativity scene. It was truly a work of art, for this artist caught up the joy of her faith and gave to all of us an unexpected moment of joy in what she later came to call the laughing creche. What I know is, in the guffaws of the wise men, in the giggles of the angel, and in the silent smiles of the sheep, I came to see the joy of my own faith as important. Joy, laughter, celebration, those things bring us to today's gospel. John, the evangelist, includes this miracle story for several reasons. It's the first miracle in a section of the gospel he calls the Book of Signs, which records different miracles to prove that Jesus was indeed the Anointed One, the Messiah. In its being a miracle that made changes in matter, John is showing us that Jesus has control over creation and that his power is from God, the Creator. But in addition to these messages, John includes another. Why does Jesus turn the water into wine? Why not just grape juice? Why not Kool-Aid or fruit punch or some other thing? Why not tomato juice? Now remember that the first time I heard this story, well, and several years after that, was as a child in the Southern Baptist Church that spent a lot of time talking against alcohol, where for all of my life, I was told by supposed teetotalers that it was okay for Jesus and the disciples to drink wine in the Holy Land because the water there was not good to drink. I had to sit in the corner once in Sunday school for reminding a teacher that Jesus seemed perfectly fine drinking the water that he got from the woman at the well. Some of the water must be okay. Maybe the water in Palestine wasn't so bad after all. Maybe wine wasn't their only recourse for liquid. You see, even then, wine was primarily a symbol of celebration. It was a symbol of joy and gathering and fellowship. It was a symbol of community. It was an important step for Jesus to provide wine for the celebration of a wedding. In so doing, he saved the host from embarrassment. He honored his mother. He blessed marriage. He encouraged celebrations, and he accentuates the joy of being human. Over the years, there have been a barrage of books about joy. We seem to be looking for joy a lot in our literature. The joy of cooking, the joy of wine tasting, the joy of sex, the joy of money, the joy of gardening. I even ran into an auto repair manual entitled The Joy of Mechanics. I am never joyful when I'm being a mechanic, I confess. And no kidding, there's a new book out called The Joy of Tweeting. I wonder if it's in just so many characters per page. I haven't looked. But somewhere along the way, and probably mostly by accident, we have let the raucous joy of religion slip out of our grasp. Church work became duty. Giving our money and our time was more often looked at as a burden, an honorable burden, but a burden nonetheless. Worship became the thing we ought to do. And perhaps it's time that somebody wrote The Joy of Christianity. Something to carve a smile into the clay faces we bring to so many of our meetings with God. All this is to say that this light of the world we celebrate in Epiphany is Jesus Christ, God's Son. This is our rock. This is our joy. This is our laughter. This is our bridegroom. This is our love. Solemnity has its place in religion. But dear God, let it be punctuated with a little giggle now and then. May we somehow recapture the joy of God's love and of God's Christ. And once recaptured, may we, as our labor of love, spread that good news of great joy to all people. And a little laughter never hurts. Amen.